today about putting young people in charge for life. So my background, I'm Pennie. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Become. Jim Bright, who was on a little while ago and has dropped off, but I'm sure he will be back on in a second, is Professor of Careers Education at Australian Catholic University. He's also the author of The Chaos Theory of Careers and joined us last year as our Director of Research and Impact for Become Education, which is fantastic. I think the chaos theory and the world we live in at the moment in terms of preparing people for change is very well aligned. And as I said before, we've got people from Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, all joining in for this webinar that was mainly for the UK for National Careers Week. So we've only got an hour. It's not a deep dive professional development. It's very top line with some of the discussions that we're having most recently with K-12 teachers in general about what new models of education and careers education need to look like for a world that's so fast, changing so fast. So we'll cover those top line conversations, and there's lots of other webinars you can join if you want more of a deep dive or to follow up with other conversations. So straight into it, we're going to first talk about why we need to prepare young people to thrive in change. And this is one of a phrase that Professor Jim Bright uses a lot, that it's not about just surviving in change, it's about learning to thrive in change. So how do we train for that? And what are those changes that are happening that makes it so important and so front of mind for everyone now? The second part is, what would a new model look like for school careers education? What's been missing? You know, we haven't changed it a lot for the last 50 years or so in terms of the fundamentals of the model. So what would a new model need to look like? And then we're going to talk about the importance, challenges, and some of those ideas in practice of that new model. You know, where in actual, on the ground, where do we need to shift? And hopefully we'll have 15 minutes, good 15 minutes left at the end for Q&A. So fire your questions into that Q&A box when you've got them. As we've only got an hour, I'm going to fly through the theory, and I talk pretty fast. I've got my cup of tea here. And then we'll get to the questions as soon as we can. Okay, so why is suddenly everyone talking about thriving in change? Jim Bright and Rob Pryor wrote The Chaos Theory of Careers about change back in 2011, I think that was published. But now it seems that the whole world is talking about the pace of change and the future of work. Also called Industry 4.0, hashtag 4IR, the future of work. There's all sorts, it's all the same though. So we're going to unpick very quickly why that is so critical to careers education. Why are we talking about it so much? Well, one of the first things to say is that a lot of people say it's all about artificial intelligence. It's all driven by automation. But actually, and this is taken from the Fourth Industrial Revolution book by Klaus Schwab, that actually it's not the technologies that are at the heart of change, it's actually the characteristics of those technologies. So it's the capability they have to extend and build on previous digital capabilities. Previous industrial revolutions were about a single invention that leapt us forward. These are actually built on the shoulders of giants, if you like. All these technologies also have the characteristic of being able to scale fast and exponentially. They come out and embed themselves in our lives in new ways. They have the potential to combine with each other. And very importantly, they have the potential to concentrate privilege, which is why this is such a social and economic and political issue, not just a tech and where are the jobs. It's fundamentally challenging those existing governance systems. So the main point of that is it's not a specific technology, it's the characteristics of a group of technologies. But there are some technologies that are already out and driving that change. So these are examples of those technologies rather than an exhaustive list. So some of the tech categories, the ones that are altering the human being, so biotech, neurotech, virtual reality, augmented reality, integrating with the environment, so energy capture, battery technology, space tech, new computing technology. So this is extending the baseline almost. So cloud computing, smartphone, like 5G ubiquity, the blockchain and the Internet of Things. And then the fourth category is reforming the physical world. And this is only here is where we talk about AI and robotics, advanced materials and surface design, and 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and multidimensional printing. And they're just examples. So, but these are groundbreaking. They're moving fast and they're changing everything about a lot of jobs. So they are important, but it's not all about AI. There will be new things coming out all the time. And when we talked about the power to combine, we saw even a couple of weeks ago the trials they've done on additive manufacturing, so 3D printing or multidimensional printing in space was giving people the power to much more effectively print human organs, so human hearts, because the valves didn't collapse under gravity. So that combinatorial power is really exciting. And that's almost it for the tech side of things. So it's just a quick fly through of what it might look like. Okay, when we talk about what the impact of that is on preparing young people for the future of work, there are kind of 5 prevailing myths that we come across. Now I'm just going to jump off. I think I'm just going to look at the participants for a second here. No, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, there's 5 prevailing myths that we really come across that we'll talk about now. The first one is that it's in the future. This doesn't affect me. It's not happening really right now. And a company that I love to follow, they're doing some amazing work in this space, is Fathom. And Mike Pridis, their CEO, just said its time frame is absolutely now, and anyone who thinks it will happen in the future simply isn't paying attention. They are definitely worth following. I'll send a list around of people to following companies and references afterwards, but I actually realized that they weren't on it. And a little example of that is that robotics use in manufacturing was forecast to more than double from 2014 to 2020. They'd almost hit that at the end of 2017, this massive exponential increase in robotics. They'd actually already hit it. The second one was that it's not such a big deal. So we hear this a lot. You know, we've been through industrial revolutions before. We've had a lot of shifts before. People always find jobs, and that, you know, to an extent that is true. We've had the industrial revolution. We've had them before, and people shift, and the employment rate doesn't go down. But this time it is slightly different. My favorite example of this, and it comes back to that that characteristic we saw before about the power to concentrate privilege. There's another fantastic book called The Great Decoupling, and it talks about how productivity and GDP can rocket without actually increasing jobs. And this is the WhatsApp guys, and this is my favorite example. It's just incredible. They started in 2009 with the WhatsApp messaging service. In 5 years, so by 2014, there was 34 billion messages being sent and received via WhatsApp every day. Now that was almost eclipsing the total of all the telcos in the world at that point, 5 years. Now, imagine all the telcos in the world and the amount of employees they've got. Telstra here in Australia had 36,000 at that time. And we look at BT in the UK, thousands and thousands and thousands. WhatsApp was bought, so the value of that company, it was bought in 2015 for 34 billion, for 19 billion by Facebook. And at the time it had 55 employees. So that concentration of wealth and power and productivity is absolutely stark. It is very different. The third one is that we can predict the impact. So obviously a lot of people are seeing these and trying to work out what the future trends are and what's going to happen. And we get stats and these trends and they come out as facts. And even when we talk to 12-year-olds, we say, oh, this, you know, they quote back to us, you know, half of today's jobs aren't going to exist in 10 years. 65% of the kids entering year 1 school will do jobs that don't exist yet. And all of us will have 17 jobs across 5 careers. Now, there's certainly trends, but people latch onto these as facts, and actually they're not true. These, you know, some of these are really old, but they're the stickiest headlines and they get turned into facts. So we have to be really careful. Nobody knows what the future is, and it's certainly not something you plan your career on. You know, what are my 17 jobs going to be? The fourth one is all about the robots. Everything is about the robots. This is a Financial Review headline using Terminator imagery, which is super irresponsible. And it's all about, you know, the robots are coming, it's doom and gloom, they're going to take all the jobs and they're probably going to turn evil. Again, we'll get into that in a moment, but the net effect at the moment is that, yes, there will be 75 million jobs displaced, but the net positive effect will be 133 million up. So, and this was just out in September 2018, and the PwC UK report last year actually looked not at a forecast, but at the last 5 years, and saw the same thing. It's net positive. It's going to be a challenge to move those workers into the right places. So it's an upskilling challenge rather than the doom and gloom robot Armageddon. The fifth one we see is that STEM is the answer. So for the last kind of 10 years, as soon as kind of the tech explosion happened, we've seen a massive corresponding explosion in let's teach all the kids to code. That's the answer. Obviously, so Ken Robinson doesn't agree. He said learning salsa is as important as maths. And what I really like is actually STEM is doing the same to education as we had as we had previously. It just goes, okay, the input is STEM, the output will be you get a job. But actually we know that education is at its best when it's its most personal. So STEM is one part of the equation and it should be in, but it's not the answer to everything. So what it really means for careers and careers education. Okay, hold on, let me just. Sorry, that's Jim Bright trying to log on. It's got some issue. Sorry. Right. So what it really means for careers and careers education. Well, automation happens at the task level, not the job level. So yes, some tasks within a job, some jobs will have tasks that are 100% automated. So for deliveries, example, so transportation, deliveries and logistics, a massive risk of total jobs being automated. So that's true. Most other jobs are already experiencing augmentation by automation, by artificial intelligence and robotics. So jobs are finite part, tricky bits, dangerous bits, things that are repetitive, mundane, they can be augmented by the inclusion of artificial intelligence. But on the other side, as we just talked about, there's a lot of jobs that are added. So there's a massive addition component that is just harder to see. So these are the kind of 65% of kinder kids that will do jobs that don't exist yet. They're really hard to see, so it's harder to report on, but absolutely they're there. So it's automation at the task level, not at the job level, and there are invisible jobs that we can't see yet. And that's one of the exercises that lots of schools in the UK are doing this week with kids for National Careers Week. The other trend is globalisation. So everyone also talks about globalisation as, you know, what's going to happen, everyone's going to take the jobs, everything's going offshore. But actually there's also two really clear advantages. There's, you know, for those who want to roam the world, you can now go from anywhere. And for those who don't, and actually this was a great example of a school, a really remote school, where a 12-year-old boy was really attached to his community. There was no way he was ever going to leave his family. His book was covered in drawings and sketches of sports cars. But he kind of, well, I can't do that because that's, you know, they're all in Italy, they're all in Europe. I can't leave my family. And actually through his experiments, he realized that actually he could, and he taught himself the software and realized that actually for those who don't want to roam, globalization and technology opens up opportunities that weren't previously there if you look beyond what's there in real life in front of you. And the third big change, so there was automation at the task level, globalization, and the other one that some people call casualisation or flexibility, means that yes, there's issues for the gig economy and there's less stability, less people being employed full-time with all the benefits with stable income. but actually it also provides massive opportunities. I can see Jim Bright's raised his hands. Jim, I will stop the share in a second, and hold on, let me promote you to a panelist. There you go. Here we go. Hi. I think you're on mute.
There he is.
There we go. So we'll just, so in that instance, it means that people can, you know, The Economist now, our next video that's there on the right that I'll share in the resources, said, you know, this is a guy that was teaching himself computer science, putting himself through uni in computer science, whilst he was picking up jobs on Upwork doing data entry. So it's that fitting things around you, being able to design this portfolio of careers. Yes, there's challenges, and you know, the Uber drivers and up in arms and trying to get some stability, and that I think will balance itself out. But at the end of the day, there is undoubtedly more flexibility and opportunity to design lives and careers that are suited to us if we teach people the skills to thrive in change. And Jim, I did credit you with this, not just survive in change, but thrive in change earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and good morning to everyone, my apologies for joining late. I think that there's a real danger with words like flexibility that we get caught up in industrial relations type arguments, so seeing flexibility as a euphemism for job insecurity. And I think one of the answers to that is that the security going forward in our work may well be through various forms of self-employment or gig economy, and giving people the skills and educating people that this is, in a sense, part of the new normal, so they can take advantage of that as much as possible, as well as making sure that we've got proper plans in place to protect people. I think is absolutely essential, and I think it's something which is a missing piece in the career education space at the moment.
Okay. So is the system keeping up with all this change? Well, absolutely not. Part of Jim's research, was that 2016, Jim, that found 71% were getting knocked off track by an unplanned change within 18 months of making that single career decision at the end of school.
Yeah, this is some work that we're currently having published by Tony Borg, who's a PhD student of mine and a careers teacher in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. Those of you who like wine might know that part of the world. And he tracked his students during their final years of high school, and then as they transitioned after that, typically into either university or into technical education. And what he found was that the vast majority of them experienced unplanned change. And this really reinforces the idea that we need to encourage people to get used to the idea of unplanned change. Chance, change, and uncertainty are the realities for people's careers in the 21st century. And what are we doing to prepare people?
Yeah, and I think because they don't have those skills to kind of unstick themselves, as I would say, we're seeing some of these other, and I think this is where it's getting a bit of political attention and policy change, is that we're seeing real impacts up the chain, that it's, you know, it's always been terrible from an individual level to be in that position. But what we're now seeing is that actually impact on industry, it's taking, you know, 4.7 years on average to transition to full-time work. And with those young people in particular affected, that 18 to, I think it's 16 to 24 bracket is facing much higher underemployment and unemployment than the rest of the population. And that's suddenly become a real economic impact. So the estimates were 11.3 billion in lost GDP due to just that population not having these skills. So it's become a real economic reality as well, which is, I think, why it's getting so much attention. And there are changes underway to education, you know, it's particularly tertiary, but again, it's starting from where the problem is, whereas we want to look at the root causes underneath and how we proactively prepare for it rather than react to what's happening. So in the UK, we see degree apprenticeships on the rise, 650% year on year. I think that counts as a positive take-up. I think people like it. Oh, sorry, I just see that question. These are FYA and ABS. They're actually Australian statistics that are replicated. So the Foundation for Young Australians is doing a lot of work in this space and creating a lot of those stats. So they're modelling on Australian Bureau of Statistics. I haven't found the similar stats for the UK or New Zealand or Canada yet, actually. The Foundation for Young Australians are doing some really outstanding work on this. So yes, 60 to 650% year on year, and that dividing line between academic and vocational education, the demand for blurring that and not spending thousands on a degree, where actually, you know, people like PwC are saying actually you don't need one. So we're seeing this tertiary and lifelong learning shift towards just enough, just in time, just for me. But what hasn't changed very fast is careers education in a school environment. And I think, you know, there's lots of reasons, you know, the careers advisors we talk about, we're always talking about, you know, fighting the system, the lack of resources, the lack of professional support, the lack of budget, the lack of time in the curriculum. There's all these reasons why not. And I think it hasn't pushed down to create some real fundamental change yet. So we're going to talk now about what that new model might look like, the model that would proactively prepare people for it. And then we can talk about it in practice, of what those things might look like.
I just want to jump in there and say that I think part of the problem with this has been a lack of imagination in terms of what the solution should look like. And in particular, when the economists find all of these inefficiencies in terms of people changing courses and investing in fixed training and the rest of it, there has been an assumption about decision making, which is fundamentally flawed. There's a cheap response to this, which is, I think, appealing to anybody who's got responsibility for budgets. And that is simply that people are moving around because they've made decisions based on poor information. And the assumption underneath that is that, in principle, you can have all of the relevant information, so therefore you can make an optimal decision. And that sounds so enticing and so plausible, but it fails to recognize the new realities we're dealing with, and that is complexity, that the world is changing, and it's changing unpredictably and continually and in what we call a non-linear way. And consequently, you can't simply glean all of the information and remove uncertainty. So the old career model that we go from the person being uncertain to being certain about their future is simply the wrong way to think about it. We need to start embracing uncertainty. Of course, technology allows us to shovel large amounts of information at people via websites and the rest of it, and do it very, very cheaply. So it is very seductive that we say all we need to do is give people more information, produce more websites, more passive information, and then somehow magically they'll be able to make better decisions, and things like dropout rates of courses will significantly drop. I absolutely fundamentally disagree with that. And in fact, in a paper published in 2008 on the first 11 shifts we need to make in a world where shift happens, I say that we need to move away from informing to transforming.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like the point about the lack of imagination. I think when we're in a system and we've done something so well, we tweak at the edges rather than actually look at the bigger, come from the outside and look at a big picture. And I think that that passive point you make is absolutely the crux of what is in this new model. So we've talked a lot, when a lot of the conversation about how does education prepare young people for the future starts at that demand side, trying to predict what the dynamic world of work will look like, predict the skills, predict the soft skills, the technical skills, and put that back into the curriculum so that when they come out the other end, they'll be able to be a productive worker. But what we think, you know, we use those insights, and it's right that we should be trying to predict what might be in demand, and we use those insights to transform and inform what we're going to do. And there's really good shifts in terms of project-based learning, personalized learning, and incorporating more tech into the curriculum, more soft skills, or soft skills as they call it. I hate that word. But that's right. But we think careers education has a much bigger job to do, and that is to actually come at it completely from the other side and start with the human and teach them to navigate their future. Because education, and we'll just watch that in that box, to lifelong learning, because when they're at school, it's just the first stage of a whole lifetime of course adjustments and navigation. They need the skills to fit themselves together with this dynamic world of work, and starting from the inside out. So what we're essentially trying to do is not get people to make a decision. We're teaching them the skills to explore, design, and navigate their own unique place in the world. That's what we think careers education be. It's skills, not decisions. And what does this look like? It moves from decision time support on that. It moves from this scramble for answers towards the end of high school using information to an early, often an integrated model, which starts from those critical time of upper primary. It teaches adaptive skills for a lifetime of learning and course adjustments, and it is personalized guidance and dynamic information. Now, I can imagine everyone going, but we don't have the resources to do that. How can we possibly deliver that? Well, we'll break it apart. This is not our model. This is a diagram I really like from an amazing blogger called Tim Urban, who writes a blog called Wait But Why. It's real deep dives into all sorts of things that are fascinating, and he's hilarious. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. But what he did is just drew this diagram, this sketch of exploring at the bottom. So the skills we need to explore the changing you and the changing world. How do we design? We put those two together to come up with a pool of potentials. He calls it a goal pool. We call it potential futures that are motivating to them. And then how do we navigate that? So what's been missing is we've got to the kind of goal pool before, and then we send them off. What we haven't been doing is teaching them how to take action on it, how to iterate those results, how to make small adjustments to that, or bigger adjustments. Actually, it's completely wrong. I was completely down the wrong track. So how do the arrows have been missing. So what we think the new model needs is these outcomes. We need to do awareness of both of those, changing you, changing world, and really recognize that these aren't static. We need to teach them how to find aspiration. How do they design potential futures that motivate them? And most importantly, and the bit that I think has been completely missing, is agency. How do we teach them the skills to navigate ongoing? These are sustainable skills. How do we teach them to move around this process and actually have that strategy in their minds for how they're going to move around it?
Yeah. Just to reinforce that point about agency, we talk about decision-making skills, yet when we think about it from a career education point of view, we don't very frequently encourage students to practice those skills. It's like a one-off. It's like sort of teaching people on one occasion, this is the fire exit drill, and 20 years later expressing surprise when they've got stuck in the building because we've redesigned the building and the fire stairs have moved in that period of time. We're not actually getting people to practice those skills on a regular basis. And funnily enough, the more decisions you make, the better you typically become at making those decisions. And the more you recognize that some of the decisions you make are going to be wrong, the more decisions you make, the more likely you are to make mistakes. And guess what? The more mistakes you make, the better practice you become at retrieving from those mistakes, learning from those mistakes, accepting feedback, and so forth. So the whole thing is a virtuous circle. And again, it reinforces that notion of agency, and that's how you get agency. Yeah,
completely. I mean, it's all the skills that what you're just saying, the failing fast and learning to iterate and learning to do that. It's all the skills we're talking about as those critical skills for the future, and the uniquely human ones, the way to move forward fast. But yeah, and previously, I think there have been arguments that we shouldn't talk to students too early about careers because they don't know what they want to be yet. But absolutely, this period of change and low stakes and low risk is the perfect training ground, and it's the only training ground with no risk that there is, really.
And it also assumes that we are at some stage going to hit this glorious point where we know what we want to be. And some of you may have heard me before will know I'm very fond of the quote from Sir Peter Ustinov, the actor, who on his 75th birthday said, I really must decide what I want to be, with a heavy dose of irony. So I think it's so wrong-headed on so many levels, that kind of argument.
Mm. So we'll talk about like the importance of each of these, what the challenges are in practice, and a couple of solutions. So around these awareness, aspiration, and agencies. So the first one is awareness. Now, obviously, National Careers Week, that hashtag is full of examples of people coming in and I saw one this morning, these people coming in to promote careers to our students. We know that the biggest barrier in the recent research, the Teach First survey that came out, that educators are saying the biggest barrier to awareness is actually being able to bring people in, to bring out external resources in to come in to school and talk about careers. Whereas actually even that is flawed. Even if we had all the resources in the world to get the local people in, it's still flawed. It's not that student first flipped round model that we're advocating for. Yes, we want them to be, they can't be what they can't see. I love that quote. We want to open up the whole world and really broaden their horizons at as young an age as possible. So actually the impact on social mobility is massive. But if we focus on that, bring people in from the local community to talk about careers, yes, it's resource intensive. It's impossible to bring in enough resources that would pique the interest and give every child their perfect broad horizon to actually find out what it is that interests them. And it also reinforces whatever capital is around. So, you know, it's particularly for rural or isolated schools and communities, you don't have that same access. So we need a different way.
I think as well, sometimes there are active forces that try to narrow people's horizons. I think about 30 years ago, I understand there was a PhD done on Coronation Street that, of course, our viewers will be familiar with. And they tried to work out what was the binding theme in Coronation Street, which kind of made the program so successful. And what they concluded was there was a strong message of nothing good happens to anyone who leaves the street, especially if they go to London. And this was seen as a sort of, you know, the evil in an Australian context. The show Neighbours apparently has got this theme of, you know, everyone ends up in Perth, which of course is right across the country from Melbourne. So in other words, it's reinforcing that notion of stick in your community, stick to what you know, stay close. And those are nice reassuring messages. We like those. They're sort of, we can suck on our thumbs and say that's a nice story. There's no uncertainty, there's no surprise. And of course, the community themselves are collectively trying to do that to remove any shocks and uncertainties, because they want to close themselves down as much as possible to maintain their identity. In a globally connected world, that is increasingly unviable, and it's very, very restraining and restricting for individuals who are missing out on opportunity.
Yeah, so we're aiming to break that postcode as destiny loop and actually use something to do that. So again, we have to think bigger. And yes, we've seen, like, even the Drawing the Future research was great, and we know undoubtedly schools are trying to break those stereotypes by the people they begin. You know, we've got the female surgeon, the female fighter pilot, female firefighter. That's fine. But again, they're very small stereotypes and on a really unique, if we're actually trying to go from individual out, we need to do better than this. And one potential solution is one that we have is the graph database of the whole universe of work for them to explore. So they explore the broad at a high level, and they can take deep dives into them. We don't take a selection of them and go, okay, we'll put these in a list or a website and hope that one of those piques their interest and that will be good. We don't want to confine that list. We want them to actually build a picture of how much they don't know as much as how much they do know. and actually be able to explore freely, really broadly. When it comes to aspiration, the why is important. Well, obviously, like in human nature, being motivated for something in the future, which is an aspiration, is the key to action today. So in terms of being inspired for today, it's it's critical. And I think one thing we've done in education, you know, some people push back on when we talk about primary and careers, and we see in the UK research recently that people say, oh, why would you let kids be kids? But actually, we know from developmental psychology, like it starts very young, that kids are naturally trying to work out their place in the world. What we've done is kind of say, actually, school, don't worry about where you fit in the world. Just learn this stuff for the next 12 years, 15 years, and you'll be good. And we'll come back at the end and ask you what you want to be and expect you to know. But actually, if we can embed their own why into their learning and make those links, we see research that says if they've shared those aspirations with their teacher, they're 18 times more likely to be motivated to learn. Now, our own research has shown that 83% of 10 to 13-year-olds are thinking about their future life and career often or all the time, yet less than 10% have shared it with a teacher. So in terms of a missed opportunity to embed this into education, it's huge. It has huge power to engage for today. And we know that the primary years are critical. I won't go through too much detail on this slide, but essentially in primary, the aspirations narrow prematurely based on gender and social stereotypes. And we know that hope about the future and academic engagement associated with that starts to plummet post grade 5, year 5, down to a lower in year 9 of 44%. That's from the Gallup research. And again, I'll send all this, but we know the good news is that if we can get in there at that critical time, and that's not to say don't start later if you haven't done it, but if the optimum time to get in there is upper primary. To prevent this premature narrowing of options, we know it increases short-term academic engagement, it has long-term academic outcome improvements, improves long-term vocational outcomes and adult economic outcomes. So we know it's the right thing to do. It's just been hard to put into practice.
Yeah, it is absolutely critical to be encouraging people to normalize the notion of articulating a future and discussing a future and being reassured there are others that who either have the power perhaps to help you, such as a teacher, or who you possibly might respect or like, to talk about these things, because otherwise children are internalizing their hopes or damping them down or their fears about the future. And it sometimes can be a negative motivation, which drives quite a viable career kind of notion. I will never forget one of my students in a postgraduate course in career development. We were teaching them how to use a collage with young children as a way of expressing their future and communicating their future in a non-linear way. And this person came back with a collage covered in food, and everybody in the class, me included, said, "Oh, here we go. We've got a chef. This person wants to be a chef. They've been watching cookery programs or something like this." So immediately kind of trying to be too logical. And it turns out this person's story was that their parents both had very significant drug and alcohol problems. Neither of them worked. Money was an issue, and because money was an issue, food was not always on the table. And so for this person, they said, "I want a role where I can always have food in the fridge for my children." And it was a very moving story, but they were already coming up with their own solutions to life problems and seeing career as a solution to their problems at that time. Now, that would have opened up all kinds of other counselling opportunities and interventions for that child. But it was interesting that it came through career, and we must be educating kids and encouraging kids to be talking about this thing in a very open way from a very early age, and to recognise that career, occupation, can be a solution, the solution or part of the solution to the problems that they confront in life.
Yeah, I think yeah, sometimes it's hard when people get too focused down that path and say, actually, I see a bit of a trend now towards in schools, people saying, okay, what problem do you want to solve in life?
Yep.
that is almost too far the other way, because they can see the problems around them and haven't matched it to career. So it's really important that it comes from them, that connection comes from them, rather than actually don't ask them anything apart from this worthy, what's your purpose in life, almost at a really young age. But I know that's a whole other can of worms that will open up there.
Well, but I think it goes back to that notion of things changing all of the time. And, you know, I always like that Groucho Marx line, you know, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, that's okay, I've got others. That, you know, things do change, and we're not trying to encourage people to lock into one thing. And it's a bit like that notion of, what's your story? Well, beware of anybody who thinks there's only one story to tell, or they've only got one story. It's an oversimplification. Again, we're back to this, let's get rid of uncertainty, let's minimize change by using oversimplification. And you see it in all kinds of areas. And I've just been inspired recently by reading Yes, Ma'am, the biography of Princess Margaret, wonderful book. And it talks about 99 perspectives on Princess Margaret. And each chapter, there's 99 chapters, is totally different. Some of them are actually fantastical. They're works of fiction about what might have happened in her life. But it really reinforces the point that a biographer can't capture one person's life as a singular story. It's an oversimplification. They're too complex. And we don't want to be encouraging individuals down this path as well. And I think some people have grabbed hold of that kind of idea of, it's all about story. What is your story? What's your one singular thread that goes all the way through? Well, we don't have that. And it's locking people in far too early. At any stage in life, I would say, it's locking you in too early at 75, as Peter Ustinov would say, to do that. But what instead we're trying to do is encourage people that it's good to aspire, it's good to talk about possibilities, it's good to be curious, and it's good to learn how to do that, because through that you will try things and develop agency.
Yeah, completely. And I think taken to the extreme is that we don't encourage people to actively explore these stories, and the extreme version of that is we give them a test that will tell them the answers. So this isn't a particular test. I know it was on the screen for a long time, but we're really wary of actually having tests or any interest inventory, aptitude test as the sole answer. It should be part of the solution, rather than what we want to do. And this is an example from Stanford D School, their Design Your Life. They've applied design thinking to their careers program, and it's been phenomenally successful. We do something similar in terms of creating multiple stories of potential futures. They call them Odyssey stories. We get kids to write headlines. What's 3 ways your life could be written in 25 years? What are 3 totally different headlines that would be motivating to you? So exploring the multiple possibilities rather than closing down. Another thing, instead of, everyone wants some kind of pattern, and everyone has a pattern, and we don't want to lock them in, but we want to bubble up that pattern and make it visible. So one thing that we use as a potential solution to finding that pattern is to, when we ask people, what are your three stories? What are some roles that would be supporting those stories? And why are they interesting to you? Why is this story motivating? And what we do is get them to map them onto these clusters of skills. Now, these are adapted from the FYA that I mentioned before, just to make them really accessible to younger audience rather than adults. But I'll give you an example from one classroom. So we had 4 kids in one class, and all 4 said, I want to be a police officer. And when we dig into why, that was just one of theirs. So they all had, 3 possibilities, but one of theirs was a police officer. And the why for the first one, he was like, I just want to be running around, like tackling people to the ground and catching baddies, essentially. So his why was totally in hands-on and action. The next one had been exposed to lots of domestic violence and really wanted to be there to protect people. So she fell straight into the care and nurture box. Another guy was a puzzle solver. He just wanted to be a detective. He wanted the crime scene investigation. And the fourth one was the youngest of 6 children and had never been the boss of anyone. She'd been bossed around her whole life, so she wanted to just be able to tell people what to do. It was a total lead and influence. Now, the patterns that they create from that are very different. Their peripheral jobs or their starting point for other possibilities are really different just by looking at that, rather than getting a test that goes, there's the answer. But they start to see their patterns, and they might have themselves in a couple of different clusters. And then the last one, I realize we're soon running out of time, but this is the massive one for us. We talked to people a lot about being a cook versus a chef, about different aspects of your life. And just as Jim was saying earlier, we're missing out on that agency side, the experiments. Now we say, okay, if you're going to be a cook uses recipes, tried and tested recipes, somebody's written it for you. This is almost like what we do at the moment, ask young people to pick a recipe and follow that path. What we want them to do, because we know that recipe won't last forever because things will change, we want them to have the skills to be a chef about their life, to be able to experiment with things, to change their ingredients. When we talk about the ingredients that might be in their life, it might be money, it might be how far they want to commute, how close to their family they might want to be, how much free time they want, how much power they want. All of those different ingredients will be different for every person, but they need to be able to make up their own recipe and tweak it as things change again and again and again. And it won't be, we'll get it right first time. We want them to be able to experiment. So at the moment, I don't know whether anyone watches this. I honestly haven't watched this Married at First Sight program, but it's going crazy, I know, in the UK and Australia and the US. And for me, it's almost like it's so crazy, this program, that they get married at first sight with no dating, no experiments, no anything. But it's almost like how we treat careers education. We give them very limited information and then ask them to commit. Very rare that you have work experience in the same field that you're actually progressing into. And it's high stakes, it's commitment, it's time commitment, it's money commitment. And it has, really negative consequences when it wasn't the right decision. Whereas actually, we never do that for dating or getting married or finding a partner. We go on lots of dates and see lots of people. But the point is, that's what we're doing. And what we really want to do is transfer some of that into small, low stakes experiments instead. So teaching them to try things out in a low risk environment. So in the D school, they do, okay, here's one of my Odyssey stories. I want to work with kids. I want to build an orphanage. This was, these are graduates. This is the Stanford. But they have key questions for themselves. Will my skills translate? Can I help at-risk kids? And will this be meaningful? Then they go and brainstorm prototypes. These are the experiments. What are different ways I can experiment with this in small, low risk ways? And they take action. Now, this student went and just spent a week working in a local daycare center. Would she like kids? And actually, no, she didn't. So she went back on that diagram. She went right back to a new plan. We do the same with young people from year 5 and upwards. So in every class we work with, there's probably 5 YouTubers or aspiring YouTubers. And one of the questions they came up with is, if 6 kids just in my class want to be YouTubers, how likely is it that I can make a living out of it? And they did a maths experiment with their maths teacher about the statistics, and they put an animated video walkthrough of the maths to go on YouTube. Actually, if there's that many in my class and then that many in this class, how many YouTube accounts have how many subscribers? How many do you need to actually make the advertising model work? How can you make a living out of it? A really structured experiment. And a lot of them were, actually, yeah, that is a long shot career. It's not the easy way out where I can just play video games. Another guy was so into robotic prosthetics. But he came from a long family line of doctors, and that was the answer. He thought there was a lot of potential in the future for robotics, and what he did was a business case to present back to his parents about the prospect of doctors and what would be automated versus the growth and the kind of status of robotics in the future. And another one that shows the different human-centered, like starting with the student. There were 2 kids who wanted to be professional soccer players in one class. One was playing rep football. The other one wasn't, and in the unique me kind of mapping said, actually, I like sleeping, playing video games, chilling out. So his question was, would I like the lifestyle? The first one was, am I on track? The first one did timeline of all his 5 favorite players and worked them back to where they were at age 12, and then went and interviewed his coach. So he did a real map of how their careers panned out. The second one researched how the Australian soccer team, their week panned out in the World Cup, and did a week of trying to live like that as a video log. And day 3,
I should just interrupt there and say for our English audience, what Liv is trying to say is football when she's using
football. Sorry, yes. Oh, I've been indoctrinated. Football, for sure. So you can see the really different starting points and different experiments they can come up with. What we would love to see as the pinnacle of this new model is that every student does one experiment themselves every year before the big decisions have to be made. So in summary, we know that yes, we need to, this new model is essential for preparing them for tomorrow, but we also know it's got massive power to inspire them for today and to actually increase that engagement. So it's not something we can afford to lose. It's actually the solution. If we actually integrate it into the rest of education, it has massive impacts and positive impacts. So we're talking about the new model in terms of design and delivery. So design, 100%, we have to go from decisions to skills. And in terms of delivery, we want early, often, and integrated. And the bit that we haven't really talked about at all is kind of something that drives me, is that thinking about their future possibilities should be the most inspiring and motivating thing a young person can think about. And we often don't make it that way. We should be making it really cool. We're transforming careers education. And I think, yeah, and then in terms of where it fits, this was a quote from the World Economic Forum last September, that rather than a nice add-on to our current formal education system, the kind of siloed thing at the end or the side part, it should be and can be the concept around what the whole system is understood and organized. So that's student-first outlook for their lifelong learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what inspired me about the Become approach is, for those of you who are familiar, or if not, go and perhaps if you want a deeper dive into some of the background, look at the work we've been doing on the chaos theory of careers, myself and Robert Pryor, and Liv is aware of that stuff. And in fact, the opening quote in a recent report on career education quotes the World Economic Forum, saying we need to prepare children for the world of change, chance, and uncertainty. That's a quote from the Chaos Theory of Careers, 2011. In fact, we've been saying it for 20 years. And it's exciting that I think the time is right now that people are getting on board with this message. But what's really exciting is not simply acknowledging that. What Become are doing is producing tangible, practical, classroom level interventions to make this a reality for our students, to actually show them how they can do this with practical exercises and some really engaging exercises, and utilizing the latest in technology as well as more traditional face-to-face delivery methods. And we've got evidence that this stuff is important and is working. We've already got evidence in schools that the chaos-based approach, talking about uncertainty, talking about change and chance, actually works and boosts people's levels of self-efficacy. Career education really does need to change, and I think the Become model is a really good, practical way of achieving that change.